What is up? I'm Jared Harris, and this is episode 20 of Beats by Jer. When I started this podcast, I wanted to examine the intersection between art and reality, how music shapes culture and how culture shapes music. With the exception of episode 19, which looked at the significance behind Killer Mike's Grammy-sweeping album, Michael, I feel as though I have looked at these intersections in less tangible ways, often connecting economic and social factors that stem from the industry and how they have been reflected in music, whether this be the Chili Peppers returning with the super alternative Return of the Dream Canteen, intentionally following the success of the calculated comeback Unlimited Love, or how Pink Floyd dominated the mainstream consciousness with experimental and conceptual albums unheard of at the time. It is for these reasons that I am very excited to be speaking with film director J.M. Harper on the subject of his brand new documentary, As We Speak, Rap Music on Trial. As We Speak, Rap Music on Trial has been celebrated at various film festivals, garnering awards and nominations at Sundance, South by Southwest, Cannes, and the Emmys, and has just made its streaming debut, its official release, via Paramount+. The documentary seeks to look at how rap lyrics continue to be used as evidence in criminal trials still to this day. Something which seems impossible, something that seems like it was pulled straight from the 90s, but has become a major issue in the public eye through the ongoing trial of Young Thug. The documentary follows Kemba, a young rapper from the Bronx, as he speaks with rappers, lawyers, professors, social activists, and expert witnesses about the use of rap lyrics in the incarceration of African Americans, and how this is the latest method of censoring black art in a heritage of oppression that goes back to the days of slavery. At its core, As We Speak highlights a series of constitutional hypocrisies and human rights violations. The censorship of art and lyrics is an issue of free speech alone. However, this has been specifically weaponized as a means of policing, prosecuting, and persecuting African Americans. Through this, Kemba and Harper further examine additional compounding issues from social, legal, and economic inequities, along with a culture of intergenerational hatred and systemic oppression targeted at communities of color. As We Speak is an effective documentary that examines the cultural significance and power of hip-hop alongside illuminating just one form in which racism plays in the African American struggle for survival, equal citizenship, and dignity today. As We Speak, Rap Music on Trial is both a celebration of hip-hop and an attack on systemic oppression, making it an incredibly important film. Here is my conversation with director J.M. Harper. All right, Jason, thank you very much for joining me today on Beats by Jer.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Congrats on the, I should say, official release of As We Speak, Rap Music on
Yeah, thank
Trial.
you. Thank
It's
you. I appreciate it.
it's This has been in the works for some time. I want to say it was 2021 that this hit the film festival circuit, correct?
Well, no, it was this year. I mean, it just premiered a month ago in January.
Ah, my mistake,
So,
my mistake.
yeah, no, yeah, it's okay. Just it premiered at Sundance, and just a day ago was released globally on Paramount Plus. So it's kind of wild to see the billboard in Times Square, but it's a good feeling.
Yeah, I mean that was actually the next question. What has the reception been to your work since the official release?
Yeah, it's been pretty phenomenal. Fortunately, just anecdotally, the people who are coming up to us after the screenings, everyone from just everyday people to prosecutors, public defenders, artists, just up and down the line. It's been really positive, and yeah, and the critics have been really kind to the film as well, and just really, I think, kind of seeing everything that we put inside the film, just trying to tell the story of the issue in a different way.
That's really great to hear. I think that not only was it a really well-made documentary, but I think it's very culturally important.
Yes, yeah, I hope so. And I think it's hip hop in a way that's not really always shown in this way. And so I think it helps to show that the culture isn't monolithic and that, you know, having rappers do Shakespeare all of a sudden kind of shakes people's uh, ideas of what the music is and what the lyrics are and the traditions behind it.
I loved that Shakespearean comparison, and
Hmm.
I love that you chose to have that reenactment of Act 3, Scene 1 of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
Um, it's so unconventional in documentaries to see such creative liberties taken.
Mm.
Um, but I thought it was so effective. What made you want to take such a jump like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've made a lot of docs. This is my first feature as director, but I've cut a lot of documentaries and really just living in the time that we do. I'm not interested in telling stories that don't try to advance the form of documentary period. And then in a way you have to just to make sense of the world because these days with the rise of AI, chat GPT, etc., you just you don't know what's real and what's not real anymore. It's just if it's digital, then it can be manipulated in a way that's totally indistinguishable from real life. And what I loved about um, telling a story about hip hop was that it did a lot of the same things. Like it's blending fact and fiction. You can't tell what's real or imagined. What's memory. It's all a blend anyway. And so I think by using the film, trying to make the film like a song, that meant that we could delve into fiction, that we could go to Shakespeare, that we could, there are lessons to be learned there, just in the sense of Shakespeare being kind of cut from the same cloth as a lot of rappers, in the way that he used the language, in the way that he was talking about lower classes and the dramas of lower classes, and making those dramas important through the words. That's the same thing that rappers do. But then, yeah, it's just as a structure for a documentary, making those kind of jumps, and not just having it be talking heads and archival. That was really exciting for me.
I mean, there's a lot in that answer. I mean, just the
Mm,
fact that a moment ago we were talking about how you hope to kind of illustrate hip hop in a light that people don't often think of.
right,
And then, to flip it that you're also trying to make documentaries in a creative way that evolves the genre of documentaries itself.
right.
That's a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. That's the ambition, at least. Yeah,
So, like you said, this was your directorial debut for a
right.
full-length documentary.
Hmm.
You've talked a little bit about that creative process already with just the rise of AI and everything. I'm curious,
Right.
like having made that jump to like being the director, what
Hmm.
was the creative process for putting this film together what you expected it to be? What were the challenges you faced?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I direct for Park Pictures in the commercial world, which is a totally different world. But so I've been directing, for probably definitely over a decade. And so it wasn't so much a surprise in terms of how to direct, but it was very interesting to learn the lessons that like the film was trying to teach you. So in an edit, you're very familiar with this idea that the film will want to be something at a certain point, and you start carving the film towards that, and then things start telling on themselves. When you have an edit that's 4 hours long and you've got to bring it down to 90 minutes. Once you find the voice of the film, it starts telling you what it wants to be, and then the things that don't belong start telling on themselves with the watch down, and that's so you can kind of remove and get down to the core of the essence of something. But it was interesting as a director figuring that out while we were making the film, as opposed to just in the aftermath of dealing with the footage, and just responding to the realities of what the film wanted to be. And one of the big ones was for me was that I thought that the film was going to be about a bunch of big big name rappers, celebrity rappers, and in the end, the people who were most willing to speak and wanted to come forward and were the most vulnerable in terms of like the criminal justice system and who had been in and out of it and had had their lyrics used against them. Those are the people that the doc really wanted to be about during the process. And so that took some just a kind of a mental shift and a process shift on my part as a director, just to say, hey, let's embrace that instead of chasing some of the bigger names and waiting for them to come back and dealing with their schedules. Let's just see if we have to make this documentary now. Who's going to speak? And I think it all turned out for the better in that way.
It struck me as like a really eclectic collection of people.
Yeah.
It was really
Mm-hmm.
cool. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you and Kemba first connect, and why, like, what about Kemba made you want to follow these ideas through him?
Yeah, good question. So, like I said, I direct in commercials, and I did a spot for Meta, um, and they had basically given Kimba a stipend through this program called We the Culture just to make things, and so I met him I did like a mini doc on him for that We the Culture program that ended up doing really well, and after we finished it, after we wrapped, I told Kimba, I don't know what we're gonna do, but I know that we have more work to do. And then, just like, be by your phone when the time comes. And about a year later, this came up. And I just knew that he was the right narrator and the right translator to really be able to speak to both sides of it's not a binary, but to all kinds of people. So, born and raised in the Bronx, coming from, the poorest congressional district in the country and being an incredible artist who kind of rose from that. Um, Obviously, his bona fides in hip hop are undeniable. And then on the other side, the people that he holds conversations with throughout the documentary who are outside the world of hip hop, he's just as eloquent there as he is on the page. And so it's just a rare combination to get in one person. And I recognized it. And I was just really thrilled that he said yes.
Yeah, I think I'm hesitant to use this word because I think there's a lot of elements to this film that contribute to this idea, but I think given who Kemba is, what he's done, his music, it adds a
Mm-hmm.
level of like, again, hesitant to say, but authenticity to the conversations.
Yeah, yeah. I think the word has kind of been kind of thrown around and lost some of its value as a word, authenticity. But
A little bit.
the core of it, it's absolutely true what you're talking about. It's like it's the birthplace of hip hop, the Bronx, and that's where he's from. It doesn't get much closer to it than that. And so yeah, he was born and raised in the art form, and not only that, but has sort of kept it up and stayed with it through his adult life. And so he's committed, he's committed to it. And so, yeah, it
Absolutely.
just made him the right person.
Yeah. So you've worked on a number of projects within hip hop but also primarily like a greater theme of your work is shining a light on significant Black achievements.
Mm.
Um, what drew you to the idea of rap lyrics being used as evidence within court?
It was just shocking. And so I read this book called Rap on Trial that is co-authored by Eric Nielsen, who appears in the doc, and he is a he's a I'm losing the term a expert witness in many of these cases. And as soon as I read the forward was written to the book was written by Killer Mike, and then as soon as I read the first chapter, I was like, oh my God, there's a shocking story here that hasn't been told yet, and so that's why I wanted to tell it, just because I felt it was important. And it just so happened that um, when Young Thug got arrested and that was all over the headlines, all of a sudden there was a huge spotlight on the issue. I never thought it was a niche issue, but the studios didn't really believe that there was a mass audience for this kind of a documentary until Young Thug got arrested, and it was clear that okay, they're not just targeting smaller people who can't defend themselves, who don't have $5 million to pay for a private criminal defense attorney like Young Thug.
Hmm.
But it's like they can go after the big fish now, and depending on what happens with this case, I think it's going to be just like a kind of an earthquake through hip hop, even more than it already has been. So, yeah, I was interested because it was relevant to now, and then yeah, the discovery of the history of how Black lyrics have been um, treated in our culture for hundreds of years just became even more fascinating. So that was a thread that I started to pull.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, I think most people assume that the idea of lyrics being used as actual evidence, I think people think back to like NWA and like
Yeah,
that time period
right.
and have assumed that we've kind of moved past that as a society. So I think it's
Mm,
incredibly shocking. And
totally.
you end the documentary with some astounding statistics that
Right.
the number of people who have been convicted because of rap lyrics is unknown
Right.
because of the immense amount of plea deals. But
Exactly.
but we do know
Yeah.
that it's been used in over 700 trials. Like that is crazy.
Right. Right. And that was maybe one of the most shocking statistics. It's like, okay, there's 700 that are documented, but most are not documented because they're minors, so they're kept out of the court cases are sealed, or 99% of cases plea out because these artists are put in the position that you see Kimba in the documentary, which is like, even if you're innocent, do you really want to risk if somebody says you can do 1 year or 30 years? Do you really
Absolutely,
want to
right?
risk that 30 years? Yeah. And that's the state of the criminal justice system, is that prosecutors, they know that they have that power, and they will go for the maximum punishment if you decide to go to trial. And so they scare people from going to trial by making it such an incredibly difficult, impossible decision for even for an innocent person, especially, to then just say, okay, you know, I'm not going to put my faith in this system. I'm just going to put myself in prison for 1 year and endure that and not risk my life being taken away.
Yeah, it's startling. It really is. Um, you talk a lot about the Draco the Ruler case and how he was retried after being found innocent. And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to tie that. I think that might be the most prolific modern case that's resolved itself. But you said
Mm-hmm.
the Young Thug case is still going on.
Yeah.
Um, what implications do you think that can have if he is found guilty?
If Young Thug is found guilty, I think it'll
Yeah.
have, well, first of all, it's been ongoing for like 30 years now, since the 80s. So in one way, things won't change. But in
Hmm.
another way, prosecutors have become emboldened because they've been keeping it secret for so long, this process, and hoping that it wouldn't be known that they were using lyrics in this way, creative expression in this way. And now that it's out in the open, it's kind of like a referendum on the issue. And since the lyrics were introduced and the judge did allow them, if Young Thug gets convicted, whether he's guilty or innocent, the in a way the damage has already been done because the lyrics were allowed
Yeah.
by the judge. So yeah, it does not bode well.
It
But
it's
yeah, bro,
it
go ahead.
sets such a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, there's legislation ongoing, some of which I can't yet talk about. um,
Oh,
just because,
interesting.
yeah, just because it's such a you'd be surprised. It's such a prickly issue. But strangely enough, when it comes to like Republicans and Democrats needing to reach across the aisle to have form a bipartisan effort in support of legislation that keeps rap lyrics out. Um, Politically, for the Republicans, if it's framed as a free speech issue, then they actually come on board and say, "Yeah, we agree that there should be freedoms of speech." But for Democrats, it's general, and for liberals, it's a racial justice issue. But that you have to frame it one way to either side in order to get both people on board.
Yeah,
But there's a
it's
lot going on. Yeah, yeah, that will hopefully push change into this. into the system.
That's fascinating. I mean,
It is, yeah.
it's great to hear that there are people working on this, and
Yes,
I hope that
absolutely.
your work is a contributing factor to that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah. You use music to make comparison. You show clips of Bad Man's Blunder, Bohemian Rhapsody, Folsom Prison
Yeah.
Blues.
Hmm.
These are songs that are so embedded in popular culture.
Yeah.
Um, and they're songs that explicitly and openly talk about committing violence.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
let's dig into why the lyrical content of hip hop has been such a focus, whereas in other genres it hasn't been.
Yeah. Well, on one level, I think people don't realize what they're singing, and so people you watch that Live Aid clip that we used in the documentary where Queen is singing these lyrics. It's like I think people they don't think twice of the fact that they're talking about like murder and death, cold-blooded murder, and kind of reveling in it. And I actually don't think they think about it that hard when they're singing along to hip hop songs. I think they just think it's entertaining and fun. Um,
Hmm.
so I actually don't think there's a great difference in the way that the music is embraced as entertainment. But then as soon as it gets put in a courtroom, it's a totally different story, and the context is removed. And you see, empirically in the doc with the studies that were done at the University of California, Irvine, that it's a very different story in the courtroom, but that people walk in with a very different set of prejudices against the music that they're not even aware of. And uh, yeah, I think jurors just don't realize they've been programmed, that they're generationally, their families have been programmed for 300 or 400 years to believe that black music is inherently violent,
Mm.
that it's devil's music, that it's meant, that it tends to revolutionize, that it tends to, that it needs to be kept in check. And yeah, and so that was one of the biggest surprises for me was looking back and seeing that drums were banned, by the Negro Act in South Carolina in 1740. Um, that with the drums literally being banned because they were tools of insurrection. I think I have the date on that right, but yeah, just the Stonewall Rebellion.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it was yeah, that was insane to me. So to see them banning drums back then and then banning hip hop today was just a very clear, direct line uh,
It, there's
to
almost a
draw.
heritage of
Oh,
censorship.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Do you think it's such inequities that makes rap music such a wealth of constantly innovative slang? Like slang is always changing
Mm,
in rap, and do you think that this is almost a means of artists being able to share their truth, but subverting the obvious?
yeah, I look at it probably in the same way that the fact that like jazz was created in like brothels and speakeasies. It was made in places that had to be obscured and hidden. You had to talk about just like you had to talk about alcohol in ways that the state couldn't trace, like that you had to hide the thing that you're talking about. Um, or going back to the Negro spirituals, where slave owners would say "make a noise" if they didn't hear the slave singing, but the songs that they would then sing were songs of had hidden meanings and rebellious meanings,
Hmm.
and that on if you want to slang, if you want to call it that, in terms of how can we say something that the people who are overseeing us won't understand, but that allows us to communicate something really emotionally essential to us surviving what we're going through right now. So yeah, totally. I think there's a long history of that, not just in hip hop, but in black music in general, lyrical and non-lyrical.
Absolutely. I
So
really
yeah,
enjoyed that you
yeah,
touched on all of that in the
right,
documentary. I think
yeah,
it set the context so strongly.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely,
I also really enjoyed how you use Chicago drill music as a
right,
transition to looking at rap in London.
right,
And
right,
I think that demonstrates that this is more than just an American problem, right? We think of hip hop as an American art form, which it really is. and we think
Hmm.
of it as like the problems it faces as American traditionalism, American racism, and oppression. But we can
Hmm.
see that this is part of like a greater legacy of colonialism.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And in many ways, the British are further ahead than we are in terms of their ability to oppress, to suppress, to operate a surveillance state that targets rappers specifically. So yeah, it's an international issue, and drill was what made the issue international when it comes to hip hop lyrics.
Yeah, I was so surprised by all of that.
Mm,
I mean, we talked about like how the Young Thug trial and the inclusion of the lyrics has already set the issue back. But how do you think
mhm.
the surveillance state of the UK will lead to the next evolution of censoring black art?
Well, what we see happening there is just this is like a toolbox being created where you can have total surveillance, and then you can use that against whoever you like. I don't think it's just rappers. I think they just happen to be the most vulnerable community that the state can, pin things on, like knife violence. They can blame the music for what is really a failure of the political system. Like in the UK, you haven't had a Labour Party in power for years and years. You've had the removal of the social safety net in many of the ways that you've seen it done in the States as well. But you can see direct cause and effect when you talk to the rappers themselves of, you know, um, you remove those safety nets, you remove those public institutions that keep kids off the street, and bad things happen. And so I think we see that happening in the states as well, absolutely. And who knows what will be done with those tools? They're almost definitely using them now in ways that we don't yet know of. But uh, yeah, it certainly won't be for the good of society um, to take the words of artists out of context and incarcerate them. That's the bottom line. And so yeah.
Yeah. Um, I know we're running short on time, so the final thought that I have here, um, to me, watching the film, there was a couple of central pillars to this idea.
Hmm.
The this heritage of censorship, which is like you said with Republicans, it's without racism, it is just a constitutional right of freedom of speech. But
Hmm.
we when we make the connection to African American communities, we see that as a means of policing, prosecuting, and persecuting
Right.
vulnerable people.
Right.
And when we see this factored in with socioeconomic inequalities, legal barriers, all of these just from
Yep.
generations of hate, racism, and oppression, this is
Right.
also central to as we speak. What do you want to be the main takeaway from your film?
Mostly, I want people to see the world differently than they saw it before. I want them to see rap artists differently. I want to. Hopefully, the documentary three dimensionalizes people who are often sort of seen in only a certain way. Um, and yeah, I want people to think differently about the people who are in the system, and I want them to think differently about the system itself, and to put themselves in the shoes of an artist. And yeah, it's just so often on TV. Even when we see Young Thug, we see him in a courtroom, and he's made to be silent, just like all of these artists are. And we hear from the pundits and the commentators and the news people and the DAs and the prosecutors. We hear from everybody except for the artists themselves. So I'm hoping that when this documentary is seeing that yeah, people will see things from the artist's point of view, and from that point of view, be able to make their own um, decision about whether or not the system, as it's currently built, is fair. Um, and yeah, I think when people watch it, it's hard to unsee and to unknow what you're taught in the film.
Absolutely. I think you've done some very important work. I think
Thank
this
you.
is an important documentary for not just music, not just for hip hop, but I think it's an important documentary for civil rights in, the 2020s America and the world beyond.
Yeah, wow. I appreciate that. That would be I just hope to put like one small brick, on the wall or on the tower that we're trying to build to do those things. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
appreciate you taking the time to watch it again and to have conversations about it. That's like, yeah, the greatest hope that I have for the film.
amazing, amazing. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in for my conversation with director J.M. Harper. As we speak, Rap Music on Trial is now available to stream on Paramount Plus. This conversation felt culturally significant, and I hope, at the very least, it encourages you to check out Harper's most recent film. If you would like to learn more about the intersection of hip hop and society, I would recommend reading Chuck D. Presents This Day in Rap and Hip Hop History, Ben Westhoff's Original Gangstas, Soren Baker's The History of Gangster Rap, and Willishawn's Chamber Music, Wu-Tang and America in 36 Pieces. For a greater understanding of the ideas of systemic oppression and how racism has been institutionalized, I cannot recommend both Ibram X. Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning and Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow enough. These are incredibly important wealths of information. While these are told largely through an American perspective, it is important to recognize that similar racial inequities exist and thrive within all post colonial states. Understanding this and how they take shape in our modern world is just the first step towards decolonizing our collective mindset, which can ultimately help us approach our world with a greater sense of kindness and compassion. I would once again like to thank J.M. Harper for his time and his invaluable insight that he has brought to further illustrate his incredibly important and powerful work. In 2 weeks, tune in for a very special episode featuring none other than Kevin Como of Crownlands as we discuss last year's album, Fearless, and their massive 2023 in what is seemingly a growing career consisting only of highlights. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.